Sometimes I think about, does love still exist? Yeah, I have my doubts. On the street, I check out how brothers be living. Yo, let's just say, kid, it ain't no Thanksgiving. We got people shooting dope, ain't never heard of hope. We got others with the gat and the brothers with the fucking scope. As I enter the project center rec rooms, some brothers might see the doom. I see my nigga Paulo, fat pockets of papes. He knows the neighborhood biddies with all the dopest shapes. There goes Rollo with the blowout fro. He's got a gat. Gots to go. No show is live when narrating. Fuck Memorex. My nigga Rollo's got a gat at Paulo's chest. One slug blasted out. Down boy died. Now show me some love, kid. It sounds like a fucking yes, you lie. Know the struggle goes on. People try to survive. Hold on. But we know it's been so long. Pain without a limit. So wrong. Sometimes I think how the world come to this. A place where every man and woman needs a therapist. Mass confusion, people living in delusion. Justify all the bullshit through the Constitution. Meanwhile, the masses struggle to survive. I think we're too busy to hear our people's cries. Singles, mothers struggle to raise families. Genocide committed through famine and disease. I wonder if these things will ever cease to exist. I know it could if we cease and desist. Giving all the power to the industrialists. Giving all our power to the damn commercialists. They see us just as being sheep in this world. Want us to do what we're told, like boys and girls. Oh God, I want to live another day so I can help provide equality. And yes, you know the struggle goes on. People trying to survive. Hold on, but we know it's been so long. Pain without a limit, so wrong. Everybody round the globe, open up your earlobe, your third eye, and then decipher the code through knowledge, understanding, then bring love into the concept instead of bling bling. Instead of biased educational methods, twisting, contorting God's message of love for every human being. Listen, motherfucker, don't you hear the screams? It's time to do much more than talk, debate, and spread hate. We need to think and at the same time investigate. Understand what our actions may create. Before continuing the cycle, we procreate. We can clone humans, but at the same time, we can't feed humans. The future of man is actually looming. It's really depressing, it's true. And yes, you know the struggle goes on. People trying to survive. Hold on, but we know it's been so long. Pain without a limit, so wrong. Sometimes I think about, does love still exist? Yeah, I have my doubts. On the street, I check out how brothers be living. Yo, let's just say, kid, it ain't no Thanksgiving. We got people shooting dope, ain't never heard of hope. We got others with the gat and the brothers with the fucking scope. As I enter the project center rec rooms, some brothers might see the doom. I see my nigga Paulo, fat pockets of papes. You know.
Yes. 1 2 1 2. What's up, y'all? Hope everybody doing good. Hope everybody's doing good today. Just checking over some news, and the announcements, they keep getting more interesting. And the crazy thing about this is that it's already been projected to be a chaotic, you could say, chaotic. I don't know what you call it. He's supposed to be the president-elect, but as you can see, there's a lot of dissension, from some Republicans, some pushback from some, regarding the appointees. And then also you hear things like this that are interesting. So let's see.
On FBI Director Wray quitting. Now, here's the director's explanation of why and what he's doing. Take a listen here.
After weeks of careful thought, I've decided the right thing for the Bureau is for me to serve until the end of the current administration in January and then step down. My goal is to keep the focus on our mission, on the indispensable work each of you is doing every single day. And in my view, this is the best way to avoid dragging the Bureau deeper into the fray.
So there are some commentators who believe that Director Wray is actually engaged in a clever move here to make things harder for Trump. He's not. Let's break it down a little bit. Put up a screenshot of a New York Times opinion piece that talked about this idea that Wray is actually acting in defiance of Trump. Here's why I think that's wrong. So this opinion writer thinks that Wray cleverly came up with a way to put up an obstacle against Trump installing Kash Patel, who he wants to be the new FBI director. He thinks the theory here is that under the Vacancies Act, there is a problem with Trump putting Kash Patel in due to Wray resigning. We'll put up a screenshot of the Vacancies Act language, the relevant part, and kind of through the important aspects of it. The big focus here is that the opinion writer and other legal commentators too, it's not just him, think that this 90-day requirement is what will provide the obstacle to Trump, meaning Kash Patel has not been serving in any capacity in the government for 90 days, much less within the agency. And so that's the focus here. And oh gosh, how clever, Wray resigns. You can't really have Trump use the Vacancies Act to fill this position with Patel because he isn't qualified under this. So unfortunately, while that aspect of it is true, which is Patel's not in the government right now, and he also doesn't fall under the category of having previously or currently serving in what's called a PAS position, which is a presidential appointed position with the consent and advice of the Senate. It's abbreviated to PAS, making him unqualified to be appointed under the Vacancies Reform Act. So that part is true. The only problem is that's the subsections A2 and A3. For some reason, these commentators are ignoring the fact that Patel can get exactly to the same place by being appointed a deputy director. And really, it's a little bit of avoiding the common sense aspect of it as well. So within that provision, if you want to look at it, you can see that there's no particular guidelines on who can be appointed deputy director. So right now there's a deputy director. So when Wray quits, theoretically at that moment, that deputy director who's been serving already steps into it. But absolutely nothing prevents Trump from immediately replacing that deputy director with someone else, like Kash Patel. So that would work perfectly well. And then Patel can kind of hang out there either waiting to fulfill the 90 days and at the same time, waiting for his confirmation process to run so he can become the formal nominee. Also, he could, well, he could basically just run out the clock that way. But what is really important is these are multiple paths.
This guy, I believe this guy was appointed by Trump also, which is, it's odd because with the dissension, you would think it would be the opposite way. But instead, he's saying, no, I don't need to serve this out. I will just step down. It's supposed to be 10 years, I believe, right? But in his case, he's stepping down,
That's for Patel to get to the FBI directorship. Professor Ann Connell puts up on Blue Sky her point here, and we'll put that up for you too. That's the countervailing viewpoint that the opinion that this is some end run around Trump is really not viable. Now, you don't really have to take a deep dive into the law to understand the common sense point that I was making, which is a regime that's willing to install unqualified leaders just on the basis of them being loyal, they're not going to get hung up on some legal niceties. So let's play it out here where Trump violates the Vacancies Act, right? He appoints Patel, whether as deputy director, as under.
Exactly. Look, if they're appointing people that have no qualifications, then their only qualifications is that they're loyal to whatever this person says. It's something else, but for some reason, folks still don't get that. When people say authoritarianism, people aren't getting it.
The Vacancies Act, the acting director, whatever he wants to do, but there's something wrong with it. Who is going to actually do something about it? Normally, you'd have someone advise Trump, oh, no, that's not the process. You have to follow the process. But who's going to do that? You think someone like Trump's soon-to-be presidential counselor, Alina Habba, is going to tell him, no, you can't do that, either because she wants to give him actually correct legal advice or because she actually understands the law?
In any case, yes. So there was not really much dissension in the dissension that time, right? But let me see how I get this off. Yeah, okay. But yeah, things still get interesting. Now, you have the war in Syria. There's been a complete mix-up for some reason. I mean, in the beginning, I remember a few years back, the story with Ukraine is that, yeah, the U.S. is extending its territories, and therefore Russia has to intervene by invading the Ukraine. And Russia only did that because they were trying to, bring Ukraine into NATO, and so they intervened. Did an intervention. Also, Russia claims to want to denazify. That was the importance of the opposition. Most of us said, hey, you shouldn't invade any country to do those things. You can do it through diplomacy, right? And they made an argument that no, this is an emergency. It's a threat to our nation. Russia said Ukraine was a threat to them. Period. That's essentially what it comes down to. And now it's years later that you have also what's going on. Some dissension is between Israel, the U.S., and does Israel do whatever it wants to do while the U.S. supports it? The United States gives loads of support to Israel in terms of weapons, right? That's the assumption. And the U.S. says openly that it supports. Both political parties say they support Israel, right? Now, the only difference is that the Democrats believe in human rights also. So they do have some pushback to Israel regarding the treatment of Palestinians in general, just in general, even outside of these invasions or attacks, things like that, just the everyday treatment. There's supposed to be a two-state solution. That's what the U.S. committed to, yet there's no two states. Palestine is in a situation where it can't come further without more intervention, apparently, or help, or, I don't know. But that's the case. So we see how that turned out with Israel, right, and Hamas. Now, Hamas is supported by Iran, right? And then you also have, there's just different fractions. You have what's going on in Yemen. They're supported by Iran, right? This is the story. And then you have also, Hezbollah in, right? Now it's in parts of Lebanon, right? That is being dealt with Israel, right? A lot of things are changing on the map. Then you have Syria, right? Syria has just fallen. So let's go to that real quick and see what it does. Now, a lot of Americans say, not all, it's like half and half. Everyone knows that. Half pretty much say that they don't understand why the U.S. bothers being involved at all in the outside world, period. Trade, defense, nothing. They just extreme, right? And, nothing subtle about it, and no black, all black and white, no middle ground, but apparently things have changed and in Syria. So before we had the situation with, what was it? It was al-Bashir, right? And al-Bashir, I can't even, I'm forgetting the guy's name. But in any case, the would-be president of Syria, right? He is there, and he was defending himself. Apparently, that's what he says. But the U.S., the situation where ISIS broke out and all of these things. So this guy, let's see here, Syria. This guy wanted to hold on to power. People didn't want him in, and so he put the military on the people. So let's go to Syria, because apparently Syria has just fallen. He's out of the country. Two seconds. Here we go.
Ever wondered if you could record your vocal?
Yes.
Have declared the capital city free of longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad. Reports say that President Assad has left Damascus by plane for an unknown destination. Gunfire has been reported in the center of the capital as rebels opposed to the rule of President Assad continue their lightning offensive across the country. The Prime Minister, Mohammed Ghazi al-Jalali, filmed a video statement in the past few hours saying he would work with the opposition to facilitate a transition of power. The rebel advance on Damascus comes after they said they had fully liberated the city of Homs. The rebel leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, described the victory as a historic moment. Well, our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher, it described the extraordinary scenes at the Syria-Lebanon border.
As soon as they heard the news about the transfer of power, at least the rebels entering Damascus and President Assad having left, rushed to the border here, and it's just a few minutes ago. So there's a crowd of Syrians living in Lebanon who are now heading back into Syria. We don't really know what the situation is on the other side of the border. We understand that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Islamist rebel group that is leading this offensive, has said it is taking control of the border crossings, but we don't know what process, where that is in the process, and what the Syrians here will find when they get to that side. So yes, it all is moving very quickly. Things are very much in flux. What we had from Damascus was one of the first things the rebel forces did when they entered was to go to this notorious prison at the outskirts of the city, which is infamous for detaining and torturing dissidents and freeing the prisoners. And then we've seen all those reports of people rushing to the center of the city, chanting, Assad is gone, Syria is free, flying the rebel flag in the center of Damascus. So that other people were much less exuberant, kind of fearful, uncertain about what would be coming, keeping a low profile. And then we had soon after we heard that President Assad had left, the Prime Minister, who has not left, put out this statement on his Facebook account, broadcast on Facebook, saying that he was still there, that he was ready to cooperate for the continuity of government, to create a government chosen by the people, to be part of the handover. And then almost immediately after that, the rebel leader issued a statement in which he told his forces not to touch public institutions, saying that they were still under the authority of the Prime Minister until there was an official handover. So trying to project some sense of calm and order rather than chaos. And certainly that is what everybody has been asking. What will this lead to form in terms of new governance of Syria? Will there be an orderly process, or will it not be? That will become clearer over the coming days. But today it just feels like, the refell so quickly. It's been hard to keep up.
Well, it is shocking, isn't it? Stunning how fast everything is moving. In terms of the international relations, Barbara, just tell me who you expect to get involved now. What do you expect to see in terms of the international reaction to this?
Well, I think Turkey will be a major player because it already is. It has been backing some of the rebel groups. It made it no secret that it was seeing the advance as something that had come about, the offensive, I'm sorry, is something that had come about because Bashar al-Assad had refused to negotiate a political settlement with the opposition. And certainly there was very little doubt that the Turks knew about the offensive and it wouldn't have happened without their approval. They will be wanting to get some sort of settlement that deals with their interests, about Syrians, about refugees in their country, about security threats that they see from across the border. So I think they'll be a major player. It's possible that Russia and Iran will also play a role. The three of them have been in a process for the past years trying to manage the conflict, and they met yesterday. The Russians and the Iranians, of course, having propped up the regime for many years, and now clearly having made the decision that they weren't going to move forward and try to beat back the rebel onslaught, but they will all want to have a say in how things develop. There will be Western involvement as well, but you know, in the early days of the Civil War, that would have been led by the U.S. It has very much stepped back. It's in kind of this strange position because it was not supporting Assad, but it was also not supporting the rebels because they are led by an Islamist group, an Islamist leader who is actually on a terrorist sanctions list. The Americans have a $10 million bounty on his head. So they will have to figure out where they fit. They've been calling for de-escalation. I'm sure they will be calling for an orderly political process. The UN will also be very much involved. It already is getting started in terms of trying to organize something like that. So I think those are the main sorts of players that you will be seeing.
Yes.
Hey there.
Here we go.
If you're here,
Oh, you said it can't go. I'm sorry. Oh, why did it not do that? Sorry, folks. I had this video queued and it didn't play back automatically. Here we go.
They just ran away because, you know, their trainers and experts ran away too. It's pretty clear that the Russians have moved virtually all of their ships, if not all of their ships, from Tartus, and it's pretty clear they moved most of their aircraft and you know, put Assad on one of them and took him away. So I think, and people might remember the Russians cleared their embassy a few days before Damascus fell, and I would be very surprised if there are any Russians left in Syria. As far as their bases are concerned, you know, they have obviously been bombed, may well have been bombed and damaged by the Israelis who have been taken out, Syrian ships and aircraft. There are pictures of rebels and other Syrian civilians now occupying those Russian bases, whether the Russians again get anything back from them. But I think generally the Russians ran, and it's been a humiliation for Putin and the Russians, an absolute humiliation. This was Putin's southern flank, so important to him.
So, in other words, what's happening right now, essentially what I gather from what I'm hearing and the other information, like what's going on in Israel with Hezbollah and, you know, right, we discussed that, Hamas, Iran, Yemen, right? It seems like Putin, you know, his international vision has pretty much, it's collapsed as people expected it to, because the economy of Russia wasn't great before Putin entered into all of these international conflicts, right? It had been steady declining. And it was, to give you an idea, like Russia's the biggest geographical country on earth, right? But it's highly underpopulated. And its economy was, the GDP was smaller than Italy's GDP before it invaded Ukraine. So with all of the sanctions, and the U.S. has a lot of power with sanctions because the U.S., believe it or not, they have a lot of cooperating nations around the country that implement this stuff that go along with it also. That's the thing about it. It's not just the USA when the USA does something. So, it takes partners, right? And that's what the US is good at. But Italy's GDP is not that great. I mean, we're talking about what? I mean, just let me just look it up real quick. I don't want to. Let me see. But what is Italy's GDP? I'm sure it hasn't gone up or down that much in the last years, but just to get a rough idea. Here it is. What does this say? 2 trillion, right? 2.1 trillion. So it was Russia's GDP. Let me see here. And what is Russia's? Let's see. What is it now? It's 2.3. Italy is 2.1. You see, so the thing about it is that these kind of conflicts, Russia used a lot of its money, outside of Russia. If you look at the elitism in Russia, and this is what right-wing people should think about, MAGA folk. MAGA people parallel Putin's Russia. They do, because most of the population is poor in Russia. And most of the infrastructure is not laid out in those rural areas where the poor people live. You see, it's not like, in other maybe country industrialized nations like in the West, you see, but not at all, in fact. So, but there's a lot of other factors that parallel Russia versus MAGA, their ideas about how things should be, and but Russia wasn't looking too good before the Ukraine invasion, and it's looking horrible now. It's looking horrible, so they can't sustain long-term affairs. The U.S. can if governed correctly. If governed correctly, you can see that, and if you work with your allies, boom, you're unstoppable. But that's where Trump comes to play. So to me, it seems like outside Putin lost, but the plan about the spying and the plan about the, coming into U.S. national affairs via Trump, moles, and basically secret agents working for Russia. You could say that, right? That's what it looks like. Even though the U.S. government is not saying that flat out, but I suspect they will. I suspect people will start talking about it because it's not a new thing necessarily. But the question is, when a person like Trump and his nefarious affairs drag that stuff into the White House, and you could see they're apparently asserting themselves in other ways, because Trump asserts himself a lot in affairs that are not presidential. He asserts himself in state affairs constantly, right? By picking up the phone, hey, can you find me some votes? So this is serious. But it looks like to me, Putin was successful with influencing the population through the disinformation campaign. To me, that's pretty much what Russia's strong suit was in this conflict. The nuclear thing, I think Russia better think about it, because it's easy to launch a nuclear bomb. But once it's launched, how do you guarantee that someone else can't control it after? How do you guarantee that? You see? So where it lands is the big difference. So I would say Russia's GDP, it implies that it doesn't have great, military might and technology. You see, because obviously the U.S. is throwing way more money into technology and weapons, but specifically technology. And, how old are the weapons? How well are they maintained? But let's see here, all you have to do is ask the GDP how well it is.
It's only warm water port in the whole of Russia, as it were. So it's a massive defeat. I mean, it really is Putin's Waterloo, if you like. And those of us who've been so heavily involved in Ukraine as well hope that it will have a knock-on effect in Ukraine too. But yeah, I don't think we should underestimate this. This was a Russian defeat as much as it was an Assad defeat.
When you say you hope it will have a knock-on effect in Ukraine, how do you see that? How could it have one?
Well, I think there are a number of things. It's first of all, it's been very clear that Putin has not been able to operate on two fronts, and the way that the Russians do their command and control. And what I mean there is, how the Russian generals direct warfare has been completely exposed, because actually Putin is virtually the person who has to, sign off every bit of military activity. And that is incredibly laborious and very, very slow. I think psychologically, it's shown to the world and hopefully the Ukrainians that these Russians, are not invincible. And Putin invested so much resources in Syria and so much, personal resources that again, it'll be a blow to him. And even the Russian press are now admitting this is a shocking defeat for Russia. And as soon as the Russian press and the glitterati, if you like, in Moscow start questioning their leader and start questioning Putin, then I think things could go very quickly bad for him. Let's not forget it was the mothers of Russia who convinced the Kremlin to withdraw from Afghanistan in the 1980s when 17,000 Russian soldiers were killed. Again, probably not accidentally this week, the British government have announced the Russians have suffered 700,000 casualties in Ukraine. So I think lots of things are building up against Russia this is a death by 1,000 cuts might not be quite the right analogy, but it's that sort of idea, because we already knew that when President Trump comes in a few weeks' time, and we're expecting him to enforce a peace, Putin has invested so much time and effort to try and retake Kursk, which the Ukrainians took a few months ago, and he's failed to do that. So I think, the momentum is very much against Putin. And, in warfare, even maybe to use a sporting analogy, once you lose momentum, it really multiplies itself. And, I think that
Oh, I'm sorry. I just realized I'm mute. But what I was saying was is that there will be people that will call this disinformation, and you know, who's to judge what disinformation is? But this, I assume there's with wars that have gone on for a long time that there's probably a lot of damage, collateral damage, maybe on both sides. But so I wouldn't assume it's just disinformation, but it's important to know what is and what isn't because it's going to lead you to a different outcome, a different decision. But this is what they're saying outside was doing. I'm on mute again. Ah, any case, y'all. Uh, like I was saying, um, when it comes to 2 seconds. So So actually, what I was saying, I was muted before, so sorry for that delay. But in this case, what do you all think? There's people that believe that the U.S.'s presence in these conflicts wouldn't make a difference anyway, right? Now, in this case, in Syria, let me put this on mute. Yeah, in this case, in Syria, the U.S. didn't help this group directly, but the group that took over Syria, but they were fighting ISIS, though. That they were doing the U.S. Because they've always been doing that, right? That never changed. ISIS is another group. Now, so in this case, do you think that that's a good thing or a bad thing? Do you think it would matter to the U.S. who took over? The U.S. itself says that this group had relations with ISIS prior, but the group says today they don't, and they explained why they did in the past, And so what do you all think about that? And what do you think? Does it matter if the U.S. is involved with supporting Israel or not? People like MAGA, for some reason, they don't generally agree. They generally disagree and say that the U.S. shouldn't be involved in the foreign conflicts. But then when you ask them about Israel, then their president-elect says he's all for Israel. Do anything, wipe everyone out. Like they say two totally different things depending on who you're talking about, right? Or who it is. So the moment Trump says something, then they lay down and change their entire perspective. They bow down to Trump, essentially. They don't, keep the narrative across the board, and that's what's really strange about this. So, but do you think it matters about the U.S. being involved in these conflicts? That's the Trump folks. But the other population, a lot of the other people that don't support Trump, they believe it is important that the U.S. has a presence outside in the international world, for example, the military, because we have the capability because of the GDP. Our GDP is big. So our international capability is large also, right? So the U.S. economy is based on its defense of its assets and business relations and its relations with other nations. That's where the U.S. overall power comes from. It doesn't come from itself inside alone. It comes from its cooperation with many across the world. So what do you think? Do you think the U.S. should bother having influence with places like, do you think the U.S. should fight Iran? Do you think the U.S. should fight Russia? Do you think the U.S. should work and defend its allies, even if they're against Russia or Iran? What do you think? Yeah, that's my question for this month, pretty much, because we're going into the new year, quote unquote, right? But yeah, you tell me. Now, Trump is coming into power, and he's going to obviously try to implement his concept of governance, which no one knows because it's so hypocritical. He says one thing one day and another thing the exact opposite the next, right? So, as a matter of fact, let's just dig into that last part right now. Trump interview. Yeah. So this guy, everyone's talking about this interview. He had it. It is, apparently it's a chain. It's off the hook. Whatever these, phrases, you get me. This is slang people use, but here we go. Now that we've heard about Syria, now that we've heard about Israel, and Biden has supported Israel, obviously. That's obvious, right? Although Trump runs on a platform where he tries to give people the idea that he will support even more. And by the way, screw the Palestinians. We don't care about them existing. Bomb them to hell. That's pretty much what Trump says, right? That's the difference in the U.S. policy when dealing with Israel, right? But here, let's see. Now Trump he heard about. I'm hoping that the question of Syria comes up here because this is recent, right? Let me see. This is 4 days ago. Nah, so I think this happened right after this. Let's see. There's sure to be some contradictions. Look, this guy is about to be possibly the leader of the defense of the country, and his reputation among his peers is to be a drunk and a sexual assaulter, openly. And how old is this guy? He doesn't have the youth, ignorant, young 19-year-old, 15, not to put that stigma out there on young people and how they approach these things, but look at the TV, look at what the TV suggests. But this is a older guy, and you're gonna let that be an excuse for him. I mean, that is a poor example. That's the poorest example you could do. That's like blatantly, but as people say, they suspect that all the appointees are, like I started off saying, in support of some takeover of the US. And it seems like the billionaires have aligned themselves with Putin's goals, actually. Like they mirror the oligarchs in their approach to doing governance, and they're announcing it publicly, right? And media is covering it. There's so many outlets that are covering this. Of course, Midas Touch and just so many others, right? But Occupy Democrats, right? But people don't need them to look at this and say, damn, there's something terribly wrong with what's going on, but Do people feel like they have the avenues to voice that opinion? Do people feel like there's something they can do to advert this catastrophe? Because it will be a catastrophe. The only question is how bad and how deep. You know, this is what this implies. This guy just it's too much. And what is his background? Let's see. Let me see. Okay, so Pete has Hexa in his background, right? Let's see. You know, yeah, he's making total light of of the claims. Dismissing them completely, entirely. And then the guy doesn't even have a background to suggest he would be having anything involved with defense, national defense. Because he worked at Fox. Oh, this is what Trump is. It so he claims to be so impressed with. The guy says, "I'm going to give up millions of dollars to, you know, work for the U.S. government, essentially being a government employee, right, under the White House, right?" And this guy, uh, I mean, just think about that. He's trying to convince people that he's getting relieving his money. Well, what about the rest of the billionaires? Are they making that promise? So what difference does it make if he even makes that promise? Of course, Trump has made loads of promises. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's no reason why you just have to accept anyone that asks for the job. You can be choosy and picky. This is like being the opposite, like not being choosy or picky at all. Listen to Trump convince you how, how it's just going to be this way. What? Oh, wait, whoa, 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 whoa. He can't guarantee anything. Is that what he just said? He can't guarantee anything now. Suddenly, what? What did people vote for? People voted on that guarantee. Guess what, y'all? Trump betrayed y'all. Oh, here we go. Back to the script again. Back to the script. Back to COVID. If you go back to COVID, this is what I wonder. Like, in this case of Trump coming in and, comparing it to the last time he came in, if you were an adversary of the US and you had evil intent, wouldn't you want a person like Trump to be in charge? Wouldn't you want that? Wouldn't you prefer that? Uh, or would you? Would you not prefer that? In an adversary, would you want your adversary to be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? Uh, or would you want your adversary to be Trump if you're an enemy or a state that is hostile towards the U.S.? I mean, I'm thinking you would want the weakest person possible and then engage. And with Trump, they already have examples of that in the past to gauge and measure. You know, so you tell me, what do you think? Tell me. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. Let me see something here. You know, let me see. Is the USA subsidizing Canada? Let's see here. You know, when he says that, it gives you an idea that you know, that it's true, you know. So the way he says it, look, here we go. Let me just pull this up real quick. What is it? Is it a screen? Yeah. Okay, it's over here. Boom. Let me just play this. Is it here? There you go. So, you know, it's not actually true. Oh, did I play that to you all? I hope you guys could hear that. Should I play it back one more time? Maybe you all didn't hear that actually. Let me see. Here we go.
The United States is not directly subsidizing Canada in a formal sense, as both nations operate independently with their own financial systems and budgets. However, there are areas where the US provides financial or economic benefits that indirectly support Canada's economy. Examples include trade relations. 1. USMCA Agreement, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. The US is Canada's largest trading partner and benefits significantly from access to the vast American market under this trade agreement. While this is mutual, some policies or concessions in trade agreements can be seen as indirect support. 2. Cross-border infrastructure. Collaborative funding on projects like border facilities and transportation infrastructure helps enhance trade, which benefits both nations. Defense and security. 1. NATO and NORAD contributions. The U.S. spends a significantly larger portion of GDP on defense, which indirectly supports Canada's security commitments within NATO and the joint U.S.-Canada North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD. Energy exports. 1. U.S. energy purchases. The U.S. is the primary consumer of Canada's oil, gas, and other energy exports, creating a major revenue stream for Canada. While this isn't a subsidy, it is a vital economic relationship. 1. Joint programs and grants. Collaboration on research, such as environmental and Arctic initiatives, may include U.S. funding for programs that benefit Canada as well. Key differences. While these examples highlight interdependence, they do not constitute subsidies in the conventional sense. Subsidies typically involve direct financial support, and Canada is a self-sufficient nation with robust social and economic programs funded domestically. Any perceived subsidizing tends to come from collaborative efforts or economic ties rather than direct payments or aid. Let me know if you'd like more details on any specific aspect.
Right. So, in other words, that's not true. What Trump said is not true. Yeah. So let's hear it again.
World. And all I want to do is I want to have a level, fast, but subsidizing Mexico. Beautiful word. I think they're beautiful. It's going to make us rich. We're subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year. We're subsidizing Mexico for almost $300 billion. We shouldn't be subsidizing. Why are we subsidizing these countries? If we're
For him, he's going to call a theory that is, someone made up. It's not, what he's saying is simply not a fact. The U.S. is not subsidizing Canada. So, and he's talking about trade relations as if it's subsidies. And those are two different things. The U.S. buys what it wants because it's to the U.S.'s own advantage. It's just that simple. That's trade. Donald Trump, he talks about trade in the most simplistic ways, like you have to compete against each other for it to be trade. That's not how it works. Some places have come with things that the U.S. needs, and the U.S. negotiates that need. It figures out how much of it does it want to import and how much of it does it need to produce to get the result that it wants, right? And so far, that's been working for the U.S. But Donald Trump, he puts the brakes on that and says, no, we're going to do punitive damages, like it doesn't have adverse effects on the U.S. And he's even talking about it like it's subsidies.
going to subsidize them, let it become a state. We're subsidizing Mexico, and we're subsidizing Canada, and we're subsidizing many countries all over the world. And all I want to do is I want to have a level, fast, but fair playing field.
Sir, your previous tariffs during your first administration cost Americans some $80 billion. And now you have major companies from Walmart, Black & Decker, AutoZone saying that any tariffs are going to force them to drive up prices for their consumers. How do you make sure that these CEOs, that these companies don't, in fact, pass on the cost of tariffs to their consumers?
They cost Americans nothing. They made a great economy for us. They also solve a problem. If we were going to have problems having to do with wars and having to do with other things, tariffs, I have stopped.
He said it costs us nothing. Hold on.
Sure that these CEOs, that these companies don't, in fact, pass on the cost of tariffs to their consumers.
They cost Americans nothing.
Now, remember that, because at the end of the statement, he's going to completely contradict it. Check it out.
Made a great economy for us. They also solve another problem. If we were going to have problems having to do with wars and having to do with other things, tariffs, I have stopped wars with tariffs by saying, you guys want to fight, it's great, but both of you are going to pay tariffs to the United States at 100%. And
he's talking about tariffs like it's a magic wand.
They have many purposes, tariffs. If
you can just solve anything, tariff, you have a medical outbreak, let's issue a tariff.
Properly used. I don't say you use them like.
And remember, last time Trump was president, there was a medical outbreak. There was an epidemic, a global epidemic. Imagine that. Do you want a global epidemic with Trump in charge?
Madman, I say properly used. But it didn't cost this country anything. It made this country money. And we never really got the chance to go all out because we had to fight COVID in the last part. And we did it very successfully. And when I handed it over to Biden, the stock market was higher than what it was just previous to COVID coming in. It was actually higher. Tariffs are a...
What does that mean? That lie he got in there. He just was able to get in a tiny little lie. And, but just listen to how he twists and manipulates the words.
And we never really got the chance to go all out because we had to fight COVID in the last part. And we did it very successfully. And when I handed it over to Biden, the stock market was higher than what it was just previous to COVID.
Just previous to COVID coming in, right? Okay, so what does that have to do with Biden? You see, that's what that doesn't make sense. You know, here, previous.
COVID.
When's previous? When is previous? Is he talking about Biden's administration? Who is he? Who's before him? You know, it just seems weird.
In the last part, and we did it very
like that's who is he talking about? It doesn't make sense.
Successfully, and when I handed it properly used, but it didn't cost this country. They have many purposes, tariffs, if properly used. I don't say you use them like a madman. I say properly used. But it didn't cost this country anything. It made this country money. And we never really got the chance to go all out because we had to fight COVID in the last part. And we did it very successfully. And when I handed it over to Biden, the stock market was higher than what it was just previous to COVID coming in. It was actually higher. Tariffs are properly used, are a very powerful tool, not only economically, but also for getting other things outside of economics.
Well, again, prices did go up on some goods in your first administration, washing machines, tires. Will you punish CEOs?
Let me just explain to you. No. You mentioned washing machines. So you look at Whirlpool in Ohio. I got a call from Jim Jordan, one of the greats, congressman from Ohio. And he said, they're going out of business because South Korea and China are dumping washing machines into our country. And I put a 50% tariff on the washing machines coming in from China and South Korea. And Whirlpool and the companies that made washing machines, which are based in Ohio, largely based in Ohio, went through the roof. We saved thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs. They were all going out of business because they were dumping washing machines. And when I put the tariffs on, they became successful businesses. No, it didn't. Not only didn't it cost people, it made our country stronger and more powerful, and it kept jobs.
But how do you make sure?
Need to run Windows on your Mac?
Saying that it saved jobs, right? That's what he's saying. But the Biden administration has more jobs. So how does that make sense? You know, in Trump's world, like how does that actually play out? Actually, it seems to be a conundrum when you want to get answers from Trump.
Don't wind up paying more. Will you punish CEOs who try to pass the cost of tariffs on to their customers?
Well, the market's going to take care of it. I mean, actually, the market takes care of it. And if it doesn't, we adjust it somewhat. But in the case of Whirlpool, or let's say companies that made water, they were all being put out of business by the dumping from, in particular, South Korea and China. And when I put the tariffs on, very substantial tariffs, well, peanuts compared to what people do to us, what countries do to us, it became a very, very powerful, successful company. Now, let's say I didn't do the tariffs. It would have gone out of business. You would have lost tens of thousands of jobs, and you don't include that in your equation. No, they make a lot of money. I'll go a step further. Tariffs are going to make our country rich. Tariffs are going to help us pay off $35 trillion.
It's so funny because how Trump explains himself, right, is that he will just repeat the same idea. I'm going to make it, tariffs are going to make this country really rich. But when he comes to explaining it, you know, he can't really explain it. So then he doubles down on the open statement, the open phrase, which is it's going to make people very rich. You know, it's going to bring a lot of money. He's not explaining why that theory is better than Biden's, the one that's already working. He's not explaining that. So you get what you get, I guess, from Trump. You know,
in debt. Tariffs are going to make our country safe because China, as an example, doesn't want to play games with us if we're going going to do tariffs. They don't want to play games. And we have a lot of games being played on us right now.
Well, I think, and that takes me to my next question.
Yeah.
Are you actually going to impose these tariffs, or are they a negotiating tactic?
Well, I'll give you an example. With Canada, and in particular Mexico, we have millions of people pouring into our country. You agree with that? I spoke with I spoke with Justin Trudeau. In fact, he flew to Mar-a-Lago within about 15 seconds after the call ended. Yeah. He was at Mar-a-Lago. We were having dinner talking about it. I said, you have to close up your borders because they're coming in the border too a lot. Not like the southern border, but they're coming in the Canadian border a lot. And drugs are pouring in. Almost as importantly, drugs pouring in, maybe more importantly, drugs are pouring at levels never seen before, 10 times what we had. They're just pouring in. We can't have open borders. And I said to the president of Mexico and to Justin Trudeau, if it doesn't stop, I'm going to put tariffs on your country at about 25%. That's a very substantial tariff. And in the case of, in both cases, in the case where it was really
years, will be tomorrow to talk strategy. They're charting the progress they've made since U.S. President-elect Donald Trump threatened Canada with punitive tariffs. There's plenty to chew over, including a provocative social media post from Trump. CBC's Marina von Stackelberg has the latest for us from Ottawa.
Well, we know that this is the second time that the premiers have met with the prime minister to talk about the presidency, but this one comes with a little bit of added oomph based on what we've heard from elect Donald Trump since last night. So we know that Trump has been making this joke that Canada should be the 51st state of the United States and that Justin Trudeau could be the governor. And we know that Trump joked about this already once when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau flew down to the United States with Trump. It was a joke that he made last month. We know that this has kind of come after this threat that Trump has put forward that he would put a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods coming into the United States. And we know that Trump also told NBC on Sunday that if the U.S. was, in his words, going to run up a lopsided trade deficit from Canada, that Canada might as well become one of the states. So he then took to social media last night, just after midnight, to post about this. He wrote, "It was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. I look forward to seeing the governor again soon so that we may continue our in-depth talks on tariffs and trade, the results of which will be truly spectacular for all." And so we know that the premiers will be meeting tomorrow with Trudeau, the second time, as I mentioned there. Doug Ford was asked today, Ontario's premier, what he thought about Trump's comments. Have a listen.
Well, you know, that's the president's words. I can tell the president. I'm sure not thinking of Justin Trudeau at midnight. So if he's thinking of Justin at midnight, it's probably a good relationship. But I'm focused on making sure we get this trade deal done and making sure it's fair on both sides of the board. Let's have a fair trade.
And Ford saying that, you know, Trump shouldn't be worried about Canada. It's friend and ally. That's other countries that, you know, Trump should be focusing his attention on. And Ford was asked about this meeting that will be happening tomorrow afternoon, just what he's expecting. And he commented that he is hoping that the federal government has got a plan.
It's noting that the trade relationship between Canada and the U.S. is voluntary. Those are agreements that they came to the table with themselves voluntarily for their own best interests. So changing, you know, what the U.S. asked for in exchange for what Canada asked for, that's an agreement established on the different countries' assets, essentially. So, you know, and also position, you know, assets overall. The U.S. has a lot of assets, but that doesn't mean that our cooperation with Canada isn't one of them. So Trump turns the cooperation with Canada into the adversary. He just turns that instantly into that situation, you know? It's crazy.
In place to strengthen the Canada-US border and spend more on defense, which are two key demands that Trump has made in order to not put this tariff on Canadian goods.
And so, Marina, a lot of people are seeing this as the president-elect trolling the Canadian government, maybe disrespecting, maybe just thinking of Canada or Prime Minister Trudeau as a joke. I'm not sure. Why might he be doing this?
Well, we have heard the Canadian government speak against these tariffs, saying that Canada was ready to respond to these. But Prime Minister Trudeau did make some comments last night in Halifax at an event he was at, saying that Canada would be prepared to respond to these unfair tariffs. Have a listen to more of what he had to say.
First of all, let's not kid ourselves any way, shape, or form. 25% tariffs on everything going to the United States would be devastating for the Canadian economy. It would require us to pull together and support each other and hang in there to prevent just horrific losses in all our communities for everyone.
And Trudeau has, he's talked about this, about it last night as well, that, Canada has responded in the past to Trump tariffs. You might remember that Trump put a tariff on Canadian aluminum and steel.
And, it's important to look this in terms of Trump's foreign policy, right? He's engaging essentially in foreign policy when he's doing this. And so let's say we go into a trade war with Canada, essentially. You heard Trudeau, he admitted that would be horrible for the Canadian people, devastating, essentially. Well, what position does that put Canada in, right? In terms of its foreign policy, and right? Because until, before they had the US as an ally. So no country is an island to itself, even the US, even though Trump says the US is, or he acts and behaves like it, given his opposition to international cooperation with the current allies. Trump goes against that, right, in general. So Canada here, what position are they put in? Should they change their stance on other international events and cooperation with their allies and partners? Should they make the same changes? What changes could they make, essentially? So, and how does that change the U.S. policy versus Russia? It has some implications, and I think people should begin to think that way about Trump when he talks about these tariffs. How does the tariffs, or how does Trump's interaction with others benefit Vladimir Putin? I believe that's the overall scope and panorama people should keep in mind when they approach Trump's behavior, essentially, or at least I do. That's the first thing I think. How does it benefit Putin, or how does it benefit Trump's pockets, his money, his income, right? And so let's go on.
And Canada responded with $1 tariffs on U.S. goods coming into Canada, and actually got that tariff removed. And so that's something the federal government has been pointing to as, an example of how it's dealt with tariff threats in the past. We know that conservatives
$1 per dollar
actually got that tariff removed. Trudeau has, he's talked about this. He talked about it last night as well, that, Canada has responded in the past to Trump tariffs. You might remember that Trump put a tariff on Canadian aluminum and steel, and Canada responded with $1 tariffs on U.S. goods coming into Canada. And actually,
and that is so funny because, Trump, he thinks that the steel that the U.S. produces is so high quality that it should be used to make trinkets out of. This is where Trump goes wrong. Just because you're importing from your neighbor steel doesn't mean it hurts your market, your business. In some ways it can enhance it, because if you produce quality steel, you can sell your own steel at your own prices, right? You can set the pricing up on it. But if you're buying trinkets, if it's for toys, or if it's for some other industry that doesn't require the same quality quality steel, then why would you use it for that? That's industry for you, and you would have to get into the steel industry to know that the differences, obviously, but anyone could guess there are some differences. All countries don't make or produce the same quality steel. It doesn't mean it's like another product. It doesn't mean you can't use it to your advantage. But Trump, again, everything has to be black and white for Trump before he can understand it. And keep in mind, that's the language that he uses, black and white language. That's the language people talk to him in, black and white language, because that's the only language he understands. And then he, in turn, projects that language on everyone else. His simplistic view of how the markets work and how the world works, everything with a magic wand. Tariff, he's still talking about tariffs. Look.
Actually got that tariff removed. And so
he said he has stopped wars with tariffs.
That's something the federal government has been pointing to as, an example of how it's dealt with tariff threats in the past. We know that conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, though, in reaction to some of these comments made over the weekend from Trump, he's accused Trudeau of being weak, someone that he says gets no respect from other countries, and someone that, Trump can take advantage of.
Look, listen, you see that is he's maligning Canada with that language, because where does it come from suddenly? All of a sudden they're they're adversaries. It doesn't make sense, and you just have to wonder what is behind it, because it's very, very blatant. It's very blatant, and I just don't get it. Let's hear this a little bit more of this.
We did ask Cabinet Minister, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, though, in reaction to some of these comments, goods coming into Canada, and actually got that tariff removed. And so that's something the federal government has been pointing to as, an example of how it's dealt with tariff threats in the past. We know that conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, though, in reaction to some of these comments made over the weekend from Trump, he's accused Trudeau of being weak, someone that he says gets no respect from other countries, and someone that, Trump can take advantage of. We did ask cabinet ministers here in Ottawa heading into their meeting today what they thought of Trump's comments. Have a listen.
The very first meeting that the president had with a G7 country was with Prime Minister Trudeau. That seems serious.
I want to remind Canadians as well as Americans that Canada's trade with the United States supports over 3 million jobs in the United States. We are taking this seriously.
Look, there's a lot of things that are said, and I don't know the context, but I do know the importance of the relationship, and that's what we need to stay centered on.
What is it? It sounds like we're living.
Trump basically called, he called Trudeau and Canadians cowards. He used aggressive language with a partner, a close ally, for no reason. What's the explanation for that, for the insult? People are going to war with less personal insults already, and yet he's using the worst kind of language, authoritarian, actually, when you listen to it, just blatant personal attacks, like dehumanizing attacks for nothing, out of nowhere. All of a sudden, they're adversaries of the U.S. If Canada's relationship with the U.S. causes Trump to speak this way, then what would he do with anyone else? So the world is about to turn on the United States president. Some people, the authoritarian countries, are going to embrace him. But the other ones who are also substantial are going to engage him, but they're not going to go along with him. You see, so, and they're going to defend their, interest, essentially. They may not outwardly speak about Trump rudely like Trump speaks of people, but they're going to, they're going to be polite, but they're going to aggressively pursue their own defense, because they can see that Trump and Putin are aligned with each other. Like, Trump is going to disable all parts of governance, essentially, and international, relations, so that's what they're expecting. So they want to defend themselves. So, this is
in an episode of South Park.
Let's go back to Trump.
Episode of
Listen to what Trump just said, right? He just said, my opponent. Who is Trump's opponent? Who is he talking about? Look. Oh, he said, unlike his opponent. But who is his opponent? He's the president-elect. He doesn't have an opponent. He just won the election. So who's his opponent? So is this the Democrats? I mean, that he's talking about the Democratic Party? Because he doesn't have a presidential opponent anymore because he won the election. So is he talking about Harris? Unlike, that's who he's talking about. I get it now. So, that's interesting because he's still engaged in the conflict with Harris while he already won, and he's talking about trade. How did he just get to talking about Harris? That's Trump for you. That's what he's called, the weave, right? So he is looking to punish foreigners, but what about the drug dealers that are buying this stuff from them, right? What's their penalty? Is their penalty always going to be death? Is it? Is that what Trump is saying? People should be concerned about that because, is that what you want? Do you want there to be a penalty of death for importing this stuff? Is it importing? What? I don't get it. How do you gauge what he's doing? Is it that if you're a foreign entity of a gang, right? Then is that what he's talking about? Like the counterpart that's a foreign entity, like let's talk about the Mexican cartel. Let's say the Mexican cartel, he's saying that the ones that are Mexican citizens should be punished, right, with death, while the American component to the Mexican cartel, the American citizen, right, who's working with them and selling it, right, who enables it, they shouldn't get death or they should get death. What do you think? I don't know what he's saying, but it's very, very simplistic, and that's why it's not realistic because things don't, people need to know how things are going to work in precise means and ways. We need details. We don't need just blanket statements or overall just blanketing of, things, covering up, just this is Trump. That's the language Trump speaks in, though. That's his specific language, the language of simplistics, you know? Anybody sending drugs into the United States. See? He changed the words now. Anybody sending drugs into the United States. So is he saying that US drug dealers are going to get the death penalty? You, you see, not that now he offers that up. What kind of conversation are people involved with Trump? He just superimposed conversations from another time into the current political conversation, and questioning actually the interview. That's weird. Look, and I guess she can't control it. I guess people don't know how to control it. Here, let's hear it one more time. We had communication with him as recently as this week. Now, let me tell you about it. You see, that is he blatantly attempted to mislead people. Had she not interjected right then and you had that conversation this week, we would never know. You would assume, no, you would know. You would assume it's the opposite. You would assume that it is the conversation he just recently had if he had not superimposed other conversations. So when did the other conversations happen? 10 years ago? 5 years ago? When you were president last? When? He does, and Trump, you have to ask him for the details. You have to. Yo, we've been talking about that. The federal minimum wage, how people in the Republican states, they've been slow to raise the minimum wage, or the ones that have, it's been minimal, the raise in it. And the federal minimum wage is $7 an hour, right? But Democratic states all have their own minimum wage, which is much higher, right? Because the federal government set the minimum. The states can do better if it fits their economy, if it fits their industry, right? The Republican states raise it minimal, which means they don't have the same expectations of earnings, in the state. The state is obviously making less money in its industries, right? So what does that tell you about the states? It tells you that the cost of living must be lower, but also the quality of the living must also be lower too, to some degree. The infrastructure, these other things, you see, they take place. So these states really, in reality, they are the states that heavily rely on the federal government assistance. Actually, monies that Democratic people that live in Democratic states, they make more money. Their economy is bigger, their industry is bigger, and they're paying more into the federal government. You see? So, and relying on it less locally. You see, there's a difference there, right? And the relationship. So how a lot of these red state people perceive their existence is like, oh, things are so hard and it must have been Biden. It's like, no, it's your own local state not raising your minimum wage, doing poor with this industry, and also politically adversarial to laws or supposed bills that Democrats want to support. Their parties are against the social programs under the tax code. They're against it. They don't want support within the tax code. They don't want a certain percentage of tax money that you already paid to go towards programs which benefit them socially, family, housing, healthcare. They don't want this. They're voting against those things and they make less money. That the two things go totally against each other. So, hey. Folks, I'm gonna shut it down for the day. I appreciate it. I had some technical difficulties too. Just some accidental mutes here and there. So I apologize for that, but I got to get going. But I appreciate everybody for coming out. Donnie, also things worth knowing. Andrea, I appreciate it, y'all, as usual. And anybody else that's going to hear the vid later on today. Everybody have a good weekend. I'll be back. I'll be back actually 12 hours from now. So peace, y'all. And until then, I'll see you. Bless.